Hello, Matis. It's great to have you here in our Cencora booth now during the Reuters event in Barcelona. We know each other since quite some time. We worked together at Novartis in the digital innovation department. It was a very exciting time at that time when digital innovation was coming up and many pharma companies were involved in establishing these capabilities and skills in the organization. We had many projects, pilots, and then finding out what really works to improve access to innovative medicines for patients. That was always our driver. Now, of course, next to the patient centricity is also the commercial success of pharma industry, how to successfully launch products and so. So in this digital environment, what is driving commercial success for pharma products?
Yeah, I think there's many factors, but Herbert, but as you alluded, for me, one of the most interesting topics is still patient journey acceleration. And especially with novel therapies that target patients better, the importance of finding the right patients, getting them diagnosed quickly, and then moving them to the right therapy faster is still a massive opportunity, both to create value for the patients, for the system, but also to create value for the pharma providers. And this is where I think we've spent significant time trying to crack that. And I think there's still a massive opportunity of pharma industry providing help and support, solutions, transformation, digital tools to the healthcare system, to the providers, to the patients to improve that patient journey.
Yeah, very interesting aspect you're touching here, patient journey. I heard that a lot in especially rare diseases, how they are diagnosed and what are the right treatments and all this kind of environment for these patients. Does this patient journey acceleration fit more for rare diseases, but also for common diseases?
I think in rare diseases, it's critical. And there are certain therapy areas where the acceleration, the timing of that acceleration is even more important. Oncology, clearly, timing is critical. You could argue that some immune diseases, perhaps a week delay is not as critical as can be in oncology. But however, I think the principle of patient journey acceleration should apply and does apply across all therapy areas, but it's fundamental in rare diseases, orphan diseases, critical in oncology, and just hugely beneficial in all other therapy areas.
How does such a patient journey analysis work and how can this be accelerated?
I think one of the key things that we as industry need to do is to take a step away from our product thinking. Like we tend to think about, oh, this is our product. How are we going to make sure that it reaches the patients, the most patients, the right patients? The approach that we were trying to develop was to take a step back and say, okay, what is a patient's journey in general with this disease, without just looking at our potential therapy, but taking a more holistic look at the patient journey. And that allows us then to work with the healthcare systems, with the healthcare providers in a much more meaningful way that solves their problems instead of solving our problems. And in the end, we all benefit from that.
Okay, now everybody thinking about leveraging artificial intelligence, AI in this context. What role does AI play by using it in patient journey acceleration?
Yes, I think, we're still trying to cut through the hype at the moment, but there are specific use cases that we've been working on in the past already, where we used machine learning, for example, to be able to identify patients that might potentially be diagnosed with a certain disease. So we were able to start predicting a diagnosis. It doesn't mean that the disease was not there at the time. It just means that it was not yet expressed to an extent that a typical general practitioner would already pick it up. So that was one of these cases where that disease, the ankylosing spondylitis, had a very delayed diagnosis. So patients were waiting for many years before getting diagnosed. But there were already some signs around how they interact with the healthcare system, what types of drugs they use to deal with the early symptoms. And we were able to start mining that rich data and to say, oh, you know what, this is going to be a patient that in a year from now, it's very likely going to get this diagnosis. So that would be one of these very practical examples of algorithm development.
As you are mentioning data here in this context, I have the feeling it's not only the pharma industry, industry to collect and leverage this data, but that all the healthcare system stakeholders have to be connected to make the best out of this data.
Yes, and then with some of the rare diseases and orphan diseases, it's even going beyond nation borders, right? So it becomes international. 10 years ago, we've been working with the European Commission on a project of trying to understand where are patient registries set up, which countries have certain types of rare disease registries, and how could we start connecting that data? Because in some cases, if you've got a rare disease with 5 patients in a small country, there's not much you can do with with the data of those 5 patients. But if you start pulling together across all of European countries, suddenly you have 500 patients and you have a sample size. So to your point, I think in order for us as an industry and in order for us as an entire healthcare system to really advance, we need to find a way, and European health data space is one of these approaches, to find a way, to find a governance model to be able to bring that data together. And of course, with respect to the data privacy, data safety, to be able to use that data as industry for the purposes of industry, public health for the purposes of public health, patients for their own purposes.
Yeah, for me, when I'm talking to clients and pharma companies, I have the feeling they are very positive in context with the European health data space, or are they really waiting for that to harmonize? Do you see it the same way, or is there some critical point to look at as well?
I think conceptually, is very well designed and in the spirit of European collaboration. I think the challenge there is because it's designed in the spirit of European collaboration, it's going to take longer to set it up. There's still a lot of fuzziness around it, and there's still a lot of questions that remain to be answered. And this is potentially one area of concern. How do we ensure that governance and those early problems are solved and resolved, and that we can start benefiting from it instead of, having it written? And this is, I think, where we really need to be mindful how to accelerate, because some other countries and some other regions are able to move faster because they are not maybe so concerned about the rights of the citizens, the rights of the patients.
Yeah, as you're talking about the rights of the patient, I think that's a very critical aspect because what the EHDS regulation want to do is also to empower the patient to own the data. On the one side, I think that's great objective. On the other side, patients may not be willing to share their data so easily. So how does this fit?
Yeah, it's so, and then to that, there's also the complication that not all patients have the same ability to empower themselves or the willingness to empower themselves, right? So this is all of these complexities need to be navigated. And yes, we need to give people, patients, citizens an ability to opt out of sharing the data. However, we also need to be clear that if they decide to opt out, there are certain benefits that they will maybe not be able to receive. So if your data is not in a model that scans for early signs of disease, then you're not going to be picked up. And it's your individual choice to say, I don't want it. But that also means that you might not be picked up by that system.
Okay, Matis. Now, what are the challenges of implementation of this AI systems and digital innovation tools?
Yeah, I think that's the critical question that we're all asking. I think there's some similarities to the general digital health implementation, right? The ones we've seen already, the challenges around understanding scaling, understanding the value proposition and how you're going to make money with that solution. I think what AI in its all entirety and fuzziness, what it also brings is an even bigger transformation potential, right? So we are talking about replacing certain people with agents, replacing entire functions with agents. And I think the challenge there is risk around, do we really understand what the output of AI is? And that's a concern for the patients, for the leadership of the companies. There is a concern also of how are we going to plan for that transformation? Because imagine replacing half of your sales force with digital agents. I'm not saying that it should be done or that it will happen, but it's definitely a use case that is being talked about. So how are we going to implement that transformational change from an organizational perspective? It's huge. And how are the customers going to react? So I think I'm less concerned about the availability of technology, right? Because technology is advancing at rapid pace, but I'm much more concerned about our ability to understand what the end situation is and how do we transform the organizations and the systems to really benefit from it.
Listening to you, I think it's also a trust case. So, how do we trust all these AI tools that they are doing the right things, that they are not biased because they are learning from existing databases, and many of these data sources are having a certain bias, so we have to know about that. Do you think trust is one of these important pieces?
So, very strongly, yes. However, I need to share this very interesting conversation I had recently where I've been presented with the fact that in the developed countries, we have the luxury to ask ourselves about trust into these solutions because we have the luxury of choice. We can either go to a physician or we can use an AI solution. And I was challenged by someone saying, look, you go to a country that does not have a functioning healthcare system, does not have access to GPs, does not have access to specialists, and you empower patients with smartphone access, with connected smartphones, and you give them a virtual GP on a phone. Is it really important that it does its work at 100%, or is it enough if it does it at 99.5%? Because the amount of value it can generate in that rural setting, underprivileged setting, is going to be massive. So trust, absolutely. But I also don't want to be too smug about it. I also recognize that not all countries, not all situations in life afford the luxury of choice.
Yeah. No, thanks a lot for this nice dialogue, Matthias. It was a pleasure to talk about that. I think we are in exciting times right now, and this evolution of AI tools, digital innovation will, of course, shape our healthcare system in the future. I'm very sure the regulations are being implemented as well. European Health Data Space, we talk about that, but many others as well. So, looking forward to staying in contact about this topic.
Yes, and working together. I think we all need to work together to get this done. Thank you, Herbert.
Thank you.